the international community has taken a significant, considerate, and historic step forward by adopting this landmark resolution declaring the trafficking of enslaved Africans and the racialized chattel enslavement of Africans as the gravest crime against humanity. With the adoption of this resolution, Resolution A/80/L48, we have not simply passed the text, we have affirmed a truth. We have chosen remembrance over silence, dignity over erasure, and shared humanity over division. We have advanced the cause of justice, and we have done that so emphatically. Those who voted in favor, 123 member states of the United Nations. 52 abstained, and only 3 voted against. This is an emphatic victory for justice. And our ancestors, Africans, and all people of African descent are today honored that our humanity and our dignity have been restored.
Now let's get into what this resolution actually is, because the details matter. On March 25th, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a Ghana-backed resolution that does something that the global system has avoided for decades. It explicitly declares the transatlantic slave trade and racialized chattel slavery as the gravest crime against humanity. Not one of the gravest, okay? The gravest. And that language is not accidental. Because in international law, how you define something determines what can be demanded after. Once you move from calling something a historical injustice to calling it a crime against humanity, you're no longer just acknowledging the past. You see, you're opening the door to accountability. And the resolution doesn't stop at recognition. It calls for formal apologies. It calls for conversations around compensation. And it pushes for the return of cultural artifacts that were taken during that period. It also encourages collaboration between the African Union, CARICOM, and other global bodies to begin shaping what reparatory justice could actually look like. So on the surface, this is a major win. It gives Africa and the diaspora a stronger legal and moral foundation to push their case on the global stage. But again, the real story is not just what was passed, it's how the world responded to it. Because when you look at who said no and who chose to stay silent, you start to see the limits of that accountability in real time.
Let me, on behalf of the African Group, express our profound appreciation to all member states who supported this resolution. We wish to thank those who engaged in this consideration in a spirit of dialogue, reflection, and good faith. We acknowledge that views differed during this process, and we note the positions taken by delegations that were not in a position to support the resolution at this time.
So let's talk about those responses, because this is where the story really gets interesting. Out of 193 countries, 123 voted in favor. Now, that's the headline. That's what people will celebrate. But when you look at the 123 countries that supported this resolution, a clear pattern starts to emerge. The overwhelming majority of them come from the global south. Yeah, we're talking about countries across Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, parts of Asia. Many of these nations share a common history: colonialism, exploitation, extraction. Take Brazil, for example, the largest destination of enslaved Africans in history, receiving more people through the transatlantic slave trade than any other country in the world. The legacy of that system still shapes its society, its inequality, and its racial dynamics even today. So for many of these countries, this vote is not abstract, you see, it's personal, it's historical, and it's strategic. Because these countries understand that the current global economic order did not emerge in a vacuum. It was built very deliberately on systems of unequal exchange, forced labor, and resource extraction. So supporting this resolution is not just about acknowledging the past. It's about challenging the foundations of the present. But beneath that headline is a much more revealing reality. 3 countries voted no. The United States, Argentina, and Israel. Let's start with the United States. Now, my people, are we surprised? Are we surprised? We shouldn't be. Because the truth is, slavery was not just a chapter in American history. It was a foundation of its economic rise. For centuries, enslaved Africans powered entire industries from cotton to tobacco, generating immense wealth that helped position the United States as a global economic power. Entire sectors of the economy were built on enslaved labor. In the afterlives of that system, through segregation, redlining, mass incarceration, have continued to shape inequality to this very day. So this is where it gets complicated, right? Because how does a country that materially benefited from that system now fully embrace language that defines it as the gravest crime against humanity? Especially when that definition could strengthen calls for accountability. And right now, domestically, the country is moving in the opposite direction. We've seen a deliberate pullback on how history is taught, restrictions on conversations around race, equity, and systemic inequality, and active resistance to frameworks that center structural injustice. So this vote aligns with that broader shift, because fully endorsing this resolution would contradict what's happening internally, you see. It would require a level of clarity and consistency that the current political environment is just not prepared to support. And then there's the policy side, too. Take H.R. 40, the bill to study and develop reparations. My people, it has been sitting in Congress for over 30 years without passage. Not because the issue is unclear, but because the implications are enormous. Once you move from recognition to responsibility, you're talking about federal policy, talking about financial commitments, institutional reform, and ultimately, a re-examination of how wealth in America was built and whom it was built on. So the U.S. voting no is not just a foreign policy decision, you see. It's a reflection of an ongoing domestic debate. Is the country willing to fully confront its past? Or will it continue to manage the narrative around it? And that's why this vote matters, because it shows that even at the global level, the question of slavery and what justice requires remains unresolved. Now let's look at Argentina. And at first glance, this one might surprise people, because Argentina is not typically centered in conversations about the transatlantic slave trade in the same way as countries like Brazil or the United States. But that doesn't mean it's disconnected from that history. Argentina did participate in the system of enslavement during the colonial period, and like many countries in Latin America, it built parts of its early economy on that labor. But perhaps more importantly, Argentina has spent decades shaping a national identity that largely downplays or erases its black population and its ties to slavery. So this vote is not just about economics, it's also about historical narrative. Because fully endorsing a resolution like this forces a country to confront parts of its history that it may not have fully reckoned with publicly. And beyond that, Argentina, like many countries today, is navigating its own economic challenges, debt pressures, and relationship with global financial institutions. So again, the question becomes, if this resolution opens the door to reparations, to compensation, to financial accountability, is that something that a country in Argentina's position is ready to engage with? And that's what you're seeing here. Not just a rejection of the resolution, but a hesitation to step into what the recognition could ultimately require.
Police and prosecutors lied. They lied about a late victim owning a gun. Here it is. Perpetual mask. I'm about to tell you a story that includes cover-up, lies from people that are supposed to be honorable. Body camera footage shows Lieutenant Harrison holding a phone in his hand during the moments before an Indiana sheriff's deputy fired 10 rounds at him last year, killing the 44-year-old black man. They claimed he had a gun in his hand. The gun is not visible in the 2 body camera videos released by the Madison County Sheriff's Department last year. Madison County Prosecutor's Office cleared the deputy of all wrongdoing, stating in his press release that Harrison, quote, drew a handgun from his pocket and raised that handgun toward deputies, end quote, without presenting visual evidence to back that claim. Harrison's mother has now filed a lawsuit obtained by Atlanta Black Star against the deputies involved in the shooting, including Mason Residing, the only deputy to have opened fire, accusing them of lying to protect the cop about what had taken place that day. The other 2 deputies listed as defendants in the lawsuit are Grant Stevens and Chris Burkhart. Also listed as a defendant is Madison County, which would encompass both the Sheriff's Department and the Prosecutor's Office. The videos show that the deputy was standing the furthest away from the car when he opened fire, raising the question as to why the other deputies who were closer did not see a gun and open fire themselves. That's red flag number 1. The videos also show the deputies yelling contradictory orders, with one ordering him to place his hands on the wheel, and another ordering him to unlock the door, and another telling him to get out of the car. And none of the deputies ever yelled, gun. That is the protocol. If you see a gun, you yell, gun. Everybody typically would actually shoot, even if they don't see a gun. Unfortunately, nobody yelled, gun. They are trained to do so when spotting a gun in a suspect's hand. The incident took place on June 1st, 2024. That's after Madison County Sheriff's deputies tracked Harrison down to his mother's home using a GPS monitoring service, accusing him of violating probation because he was confined to home detention in Indianapolis, which was about 45 minutes away from his mother's home in Marion County. The Madison County Sheriff's Department told local media that they applied for a search warrant to search his car and found, quote, a handgun loaded with 5 rounds of ammunition, as well as a box of additional ammunition and a large knife. But it is not clear where exactly in the car they found those weapons. 10 days after the shooting, Madison County Prosecutor's Office announced it would not be filing criminal charges against the deputies. They stated the following on their Facebook page. Deputies gave 26 loud verbal commands for Harrison to show his hands, not to reach for his pocket, to unlock the vehicle, and to exit the vehicle. Harrison disobeyed these lawful commands, refused to exit the vehicle, drew a handgun from his pocket, and raised that handgun toward a deputy. Now, so they determined that his death was caused by himself. The federal lawsuit filed on May 31st by Indiana attorney David B. Owens states that it was impossible for the deputy to have seen a gun in Harrison's hand from where he had been standing, accusing the other deputies of covering up for him. That's called a criminal conspiracy of truth. The lawsuit accuses deputies of using deadly, excessive force, unlawful seizure, unlawful entry, assault and battery, wrongful death, negligent infliction of emotional distress, trespassing on his mother's property without a warrant or even notifying her, failure to intervene, or going along with the unconstitutional practices without intervening, and conspiracy to deprive Mr. Harrison of his constitutional rights. Where's the gun? Simple, right? I believe that the attorney is correct. I do not believe Mr. Harrison pulled a gun, raised a gun at any time in this matter. I do believe these officers played fast and loose with the Constitution and did not have the proper authority to even be on the property they were on. I also believe that they engaged in a significant conspiracy. Not simply one agency, but two. And thus, a cover-up is before us. Now, what this attorney has the ability to do is get every cop to swear and affirm that they saw a gun. That's not going to happen. All of these cops aren't going to lie. Some of them will, some of them, hopefully at least one of them will not. And we'll bring you the updates as they come. Very sad situation. Tehran, thoughts?
Well, too often on this show, I'm saying condolences to families of people who have been lost far too soon. We see that once again, a police officer mistook a phone as a gun. Sometimes it's a phone, sometimes it's a sandwich. Every single time it happens more often than not to someone of color. I don't know why these officers only have 20/20 vision when it comes to white suspects and have far sight, near sight when it comes to the black one. The original count on this was not a violent charge. For all we know, this wasn't a violent man. So what was he raising a gun for, surrounded by police officers? The first police officer that goes over there clearly looks in the window, is not scared. The other police officer that's standing to the right of the window of the windshield sees right in, is not scared. The other police officers are not scared. One police officer standing the farthest way, all of a sudden, Hawkeye sees the gun and starts shooting, and of course the other police officers back up their fellow officer. Being a police officer is hard. Police officers, please, do not allow your incompetence to make it even harder. And now we see conspiracy, but we also see collusion as the system collapses in to protect one of their own instead of simply admitting their mistake. There was no gun on the person. And for anyone says, but there was a gun in the car, they're not fortune tellers. They did not know that beforehand. That gun was locked away in a box, as is his right by the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution.
Right.
So where are all those people now?
That's right. And the cops yelled out 3 contradictory commands to this young person who was involved in what we would call a technical probation violation. due to the compliance standard. We'll bring up this as they come. There's a black teen girl being brutally arrested by cops outside of the school. Here it is. We do have more video. What you are seeing is a 14-year-old child being arrested outside of a school by a police officer. The children in the background, obviously her peers, okay? It continues. Here it is.
What the recognition could ultimately require. Now, let's look at Israel, because this one requires a bit more nuance here. Again, at first glance, Israel's no vote may also seem less directly connected to the transatlantic slave trade. But this is where geopolitics comes in. Israel is one of the United States' closest allies, and on major international votes, especially ones with legal and historical implications, it often aligns with U.S. positions. So part of this vote is likely strategic alignment. But there's also a broader layer here that we need to discuss. Israel as a state is deeply engaged in its own complex historical and moral narratives, particularly around persecution, historical trauma, and international law. Supporting a resolution that elevates one historical injustice to the level of the gravest crime against humanity and potentially open pathways to reparations also raises questions about how similar frameworks can be applied globally. And that's where things get sensitive. Because once you establish a strong global precedent around historical crimes and reparative justice, it doesn't exist in isolation. It can influence how other conflicts, histories, and claims are interpreted on the international stage. Now, we've got to ask, right? Could part of Israel's position also be tied to how it views historical crimes more broadly? It's possible, but let's be precise here, because the Holocaust is widely recognized as one of the most horrific crimes in human history. And Israel's national identity is deeply shaped by that legacy. So when another resolution comes and declares the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity, it introduces a sensitive dynamic. Not necessarily a direct contradiction, but a question of hierarchy, right? How do nations interpret language like gravest? Does elevating one atrocity risk being seen as diminishing the other? Now, to be clear, this resolution is not about comparison, right? It doesn't erase or minimize other atrocities. But in global politics, language matters, and countries are usually very careful about how these definitions are framed, especially when they intersect with your own historical narratives and identities. So while we can't say definitively that this is why Israel voted no, it does highlight something important. These votes are not just about history. They're about how history is ranked, remembered, and politically interpreted. And that's why things become complex. So again, this vote is not just about the past. It's about precedent. It's about alignment. And it's about how countries position themselves in a world where historical accountability is becoming a more central part of global politics. And when you look at all three no votes together, you start to see a pattern. This is not random. These are strategic decisions shaped by history, by alliances, and by what each country stands to lose if the conversation moves from recognition to responsibility. Now let's talk about the abstentions, okay? Because this might actually be the most revealing group of all. 52 countries chose not to vote yes, but also not to vote no. And when you look at who they are, Again, a very clear pattern emerges. A significant number of them are European nations, countries like the United Kingdom, Germany, Netherlands, and Portugal. Now pause there, because these are not just any countries. These are nations that were deeply involved in the transatlantic slave trade and colonial expansion, whether through transporting enslaved Africans, financing the trade, or building empires that extracted wealth across Africa and the Caribbean. So the question becomes, why abstain? Why not just vote no? Well, because abstention is strategic. It allows these countries to avoid openly opposing a resolution that is morally difficult to reject, while also avoiding fully endorsing language that could carry legal, financial, and political consequences. And those consequences are real. Many European countries have, in recent years, started to acknowledge their colonial past. Some have even issued apologies or begun returning artifacts. But this resolution goes a step further. It doesn't just ask for acknowledgement. It opens the door to reparations, compensation, structured negotiations. And that's where things get complicated, because fully supporting this resolution could strengthen claims against them, not just morally, but potentially legally and financially. So what do? They choose the middle ground, the easier way out. No opposition, but no commitment either. And when you zoom out, what you're really seeing is this. The Global South is pushing for recognition and repair, while many former colonial powers are managing their exposure. And that tension, that's where the real battle over reparations is going to play out.
The adoption of this text is not an arrival at a destination, but rather a major step in our ongoing journey and collective conversation for reparatory justice. We remain committed to continued engagement with all member states in the shared spirit of cooperation. Yesterday, His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana, who initiated this landmark resolution, talked about the importance of language, how it shapes our understanding of the past and our vision for the future. Today, through this resolution, the world has spoken with clarity and truth. We have affirmed that the trafficking of enslaved Africans and their racialized chattel enslavement is the gravest crime against humanity. A crime whose scale, structure, and enduring consequences demand recognition at the highest level of our shared global conscience, so that we can move forward in healing and in preventing such a crime from ever happening again. This resolution is not about apportioning blame across generations or nations. It is not about reopening old wounds. It is about ensuring that those wounds are neither forgotten nor denied. It is about creating space for truth, for education, and for a more honest global conversation that allows us to move forward together with greater understanding. History, as we know, is rarely simple. It is layered, it is complex, and at times uncomfortable. This resolution does not deny that complexity.